Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our last session for this spring OnlineTestConf. My name is Joel, and I'm going to be doing this last keynote. And the theme of my keynote is communication skills for testers or communication and testers. And before I even get started, I believe that the idea of a keynote is obviously to provide with some tools that will help you to do something better today or tomorrow. But more than that is to try to invoke a thought, try to make you look at something that you have been doing up to now and maybe look at it in a different light, or maybe understand that you might have been doing something wrong or you could have been doing something better. And in this case, I do want to talk about something that most of us know it's important, and I will explain why I believe that, but we don't invest enough time in order to make it correctly, at least as testers. So first of all, first things first, let's make sure that my presentation works. That should be a first. So what I want to cover today, and again, it's a bunch of stuff, but I'll try to go over that quickly and explain the things that I need to explain and go over the things that are less important. I want to first of all try to explain why do I think that we need to talk about communication and testing. Then, in order to make sure that we have a common grounds to speak about, I'm going to define communication, and I'm going to define the typical testing communications, including the main issues that they have, or we have. Then I want to share with you something that I made after reviewing this topic with hundreds of testers, and that is my 4 levels of testing communication model. And towards the end, I will want to focus on some tools that will actually help you out in order to be a better communicator and a better tester per se, once we actually go over there. And just as always, I won't be looking into the Slack as I speak, but I will go over it once we're done. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and ask them. So first of all, who am I? And I have been speaking quite a while, but I haven't introduced myself, I guess. So I've been a tester for the last 21 years, and I started as an accidental tester, meaning I didn't want to be a tester. I didn't know what testing was, but I ended up being a tester in a small startup, and 21 years later, here I am. After being a tester, QA manager, I blog, speak in multiple sessions, and my current role is as a solution architect at a company called PractiTest, where I'm going to be, again, speaking a bit about it, but I manage the testing efforts as well as the product side of the house. And among the other projects that I like to be part of, one of them is this OnlineTestConf, but also the State of Testing Survey and Report, which is a report that we actually, together with T-Time with Testers, Practice and T-Time with Testers, we try to provide insights into what's going on the testing world year after year. And again, I'll speak a little bit about it once I present some data about the state of testing. If I need to speak a little bit about PractiTest, the company that I work with, and again, we're one of the sponsors here, it's a very, very good QA management solution. So if you don't have a QA management solution and you want to look into one of them, we have a 2-week free evaluation license. Go ahead and play with it. Integrates pretty quickly with lots of other systems. Extremely intuitive and also very flexible. So without going too much details into that, I really invite you, if you want to just go to our site, there's a button to start the 2-week free trial. So go ahead and do it. Now let's start talking about what we came here to talk about. And that is, first of all, why do we need to talk about communication? I mean, we're testers, right? We press buttons, we find bugs, we run test cases and analyze them. So why do we need to talk about communication? In order to answer that, I want to first of all ask you a question. Anyone here knows why do we test? Ponder about that in a couple seconds. I mean, what's the objective of our testing? Okay. By the way, this is a question that I didn't take lightly. And basically what I came up with, and if I try to think about something that Alan said yesterday, he says that he believes that we test in order to, and again, I'm paraphrasing here, try to release applications faster to the field and with more quality. I believe that, and again, I'm sure that I just killed his definition, but for me, the definition of why do we test is a very simple one, but a very straightforward one. We test in order to provide information about our projects and our products so that the stakeholders can actually make correct decisions. Okay, a lot of text, a lot of data, so let me just strip it down to the bare minimum. The reason that we test is because we're looking for information. What information? obviously information about our project on that order. We want to say, hey, how is the project coming along and what is the status of the product? And we're not bringing that information for the sake of information. We're doing it so that our stakeholders, those people in our projects, can actually make the correct decisions. That's it, guys. If you could take a crystal ball, if you could go to a genie and say, hey, give me that information so that stakeholders can make the decisions, you wouldn't need to run a single test and you would still be doing your jobs. Okay, so what is testing? Well, testing is another one of the tools, maybe a very important one, but as Adam, Alan, and a lot of people have been saying today, we have tons of tools in our power. Testing, running scripts, exploratory testing, even analyzing logs, anything that you're doing, it's only another one of those tools, the tools that we actually do in order to find, in order to seek, in order to reach out that information that we're looking for. But it's not the only tool. And I do believe that there are many tools that are very valuable that we're not paying enough attention. Now, obviously, one of those tools is communication. That's what I'm talking about. But if you remember what I said at the beginning, most of us think and know that communication is critical for our jobs. And I know that because if I look into, and again, I was talking about the state of testing survey and reports, just as a small introduction, we run together with Tea Time with Tester a survey every December, January, where we ask as many testers as we can a ton of questions about what they're doing, what's important for them, where their job is going. Again, if you're part of the OnlineTestConf, you will also be invited to take the survey next year. But what we saw is that if we ask testers what is the most important skill they need to have, then back in 2013, 23% said that it's important and 76% said that it's very important. So only 1% said that communication is not important. If we look into 2015, then only 2% of people said that communication is not important. Back in 2016, again, only 1% of people said that communication was not important. And if we look into the latest survey that we took, again, only 2% of people said that communication is not important. Now, the vast majority of people said that it's very important. And if we look over all the results and if we look into all the skills that we actually ask people to grade, communication was always by far the most important skill that testers have. Now, ask yourselves, are you a good communicator? Are you the best communicator in your team? Do you even communicate good enough with management, with other people? Are you able to pass that message along? And again, don't tell me, tell yourselves, and I'm sure that you're going to say that, no, we're not good communicators. So let's actually try to understand why are we not good communicators? And in order to answer that, then I want to start, first of all, by defining what is communication. And for this, I'm going back to my college years. And trying, again, looking into how in one of my communication classes we define communication. Then we saw a couple of examples. And communication, many people think about it like this. I'm sitting with someone and I'm trying to pass along my idea, and that someone is going to try to pass along his idea, and we're going to try, each one of us, to either convince or inform one or the other. So yeah, that's communication. But also this communication, when you're actually a part of a group, and you are trying to compete ideas with either more people, okay? And it might not be a matter of convincing, it might be a matter of communicating, but again, it's still a more complex communication mechanism. But communication is also this. If you're gonna be sending an email to someone, you're transmitting information, you're communicating with someone else. And if you look about it, and if you think about it, communication can even look like this. Communication is very amorphic, or it has many, many forms. It's not that it doesn't have one form, it has many, many forms. And it can take many ways of doing it, okay? So if we try to look into the common denominators, what is communication? Then basically communication is going to be defined by 4 basic components. And I'm going back to college here. When we think about communication, the first component is going to be the goal. I always have a goal for my communication. There are always players. There is either one, usually it's one sender. It can be multiple senders, but that's more complex. And there's usually either one, or in most cases, many receivers of that message. There's also the channel. The channel is what I'm using in order to communicate. And the channel is also defined by encoding, medium, and decoding. So for example, to give you an example, encoding might be my voice. My vocal cords are actually making noise right now. The medium is my voice that is going out. It's passing through cables and internet and wires and what's more, and then it's being decoded by your speakers and it's entering your ear. But what's more important, it's being decoded by your brain. Okay, so that is the channel. And the message are basically the words that I'm saying. So again, trying to put this into form that it's easier for us to grasp, then most of us will think that communication looks like this. So this is an example. Me and my wife, I'm actually telling her how much I love her and I appreciate everything that she does for me, and everything's quiet and she's happy because she understands what I'm saying. So yeah, in theory, we think of communication like this. But in our reality, communication looks like this. Okay, this is the reality of most of our communications in our day-to-day work. Try to figure out who's talking here. Your guess is as good as mine. There's usually not one person communicating. There's multiple people communicating. There's vast messages going around. Not only is there a channel, but there's what is called noise. And noise is things that are interfering with our communication, either because they make people not listen to us or they try to compete with our message being transmitted. And obviously, it's a lot harder to try to pass along any message in an environment like this than in an environment like this, that this is the one that we usually think about. So basically, if we think about it, communication is not simple. Communication is messy, okay? And there's a joke for everyone who likes football. But if communication is messy, that it's still something that we can do, or the simplest of things that we can do in order to try to clear up the mess out of our communication and be better communicators, regardless if we're talking about testing or you with your spouse or again, partners, even with your kids or whoever you want to be with. It's something called communication alignment. Okay, communication alignment, it's not a testing concept, it's a communication concept, but it's a pretty simple one. Communication alignment basically means that while we're communicating, we need to be very focused on our goal, okay? And if we're focused on our goal, then we're gonna be thinking about three very important questions. First of all, if I'm thinking all the time about the goal of my communication, what do I want to achieve with what I'm trying to communicate? I want to, first of all, say, hey, what is that I want to achieve? And let's talk about a testing example. Let's say that my understanding of the current status of the version is that no, we're not going to be ready in order to meet our deadlines. Okay, it might be that it needs to be stable for the end of the sprint, or let's think about a larger project. No, we're not going to be able to release the product on time and roll it out by the schedule, even if it's 3 months from now or 6 months from now. So this is what I want to achieve. I want people to understand that we're in trouble. So the first thing that I need to think about is, who is sending this message? Obviously, this is going to be me. But not only who is sending, but how am I perceived in my organization? If I wake up right now and I walk to the door and start screaming, hey, I don't know, the sky is falling, how are people going to receive that? So who are the people who need to receive my message is very important. And what is that message that I'm trying to convey? Okay? So once you understand what do you want to achieve, who is sending that, who's going to be receiving, and what message do I want to pass along, then I need to start to understand which is the best channel that I can use in order to transmit this message. Okay, and all of these are not trivial questions. And communication alignment basically means that it's not only about thinking what do you need to say, but what do you want to achieve, who's saying, who's receiving, and how do you want to say it or how do you want to transmit it. Again, it may sound simple, but it's way more complex once we think about it. And I'm going to be speaking about that in a couple minutes, but before I talk about the model that basically tries to explain about communication alignment on the different facets of testing, I want to try to put a common denominators on what are the typical testing communications that we have. And again, very roughly from 20,000 feet, if you try to look into all types of professional communications that we have in testing, then we can categorize them in these six, let's say, areas. We can talk about bugs. We can talk about test plans. We can talk about test reports. And the difference obviously being, okay, the test plans is what am I planning to test, the test report is what am I finding. Now, you can do it on a high level, and that would be your test reports or your test summary reports that are going to be more focused and more online. Again, you can talk about status updates and dashboards, and you can talk about release notes. Okay, those are the typical, if you look into the typical testing or typical testers, it would be your typical testing communications that you would be doing. The problem is that, and again, I was working with, I would like to say hundreds of organizations as part of my work in PractiTest, and looking into this aspect of their work. And what I realized is that as testers, we seldom stop to align our communication with the goals we want to achieve. So we found the bug, we write the bug, we basically submit the bug, or we find the, run a test, report the test, and we move on. We limit ourselves to updating everyone on what's the status of our tests, what's the status of our bugs, while we could be achieving a lot more if we only stop to think a little bit about how do we need to transmit that information to the rest of the people. So in fact, aligned communication might be the single most important tool that a tester can have. And again, I can stand behind this and say that yes, it's the single most important tool, because if you don't have this tool correct, regardless of the test you were running or what those results were, you're not going to be able to make that change, to make that influence on your project in order for your stakeholders to make that correct decision. Okay, it doesn't mean that testing is not important. It doesn't mean that finding the bugs and designing the coverage and everything else is not important. But I do believe that at this stage, and obviously after we saw everything that we have been talking about, how do you want to keep your QA relevant, and how can you add value with your agile teams and everything else, you need to understand that communication becomes the most important thing that you can actually do. If this is the case, then I want to try to stop looking at communication as a one-size-fits-all kind of operation that we do in testing, and understand that there are different levels of communication, and that depending on each level, we need to approach our communication in a different way. Okay, so these 4 levels of testing communication model is something that came up after, again, analyzing hundreds, if not thousands, of testers and their successful and unsuccessful communications, and talking to them and interviewing them and analyzing what they were doing. So if I try to categorize communication in testing into 4 main groups or 4 main levels, then these are the levels. The first one I call over-the-wall communication, and I will go over each one of them in detail in the coming minutes. So the first one is going to be the over-the-wall communication. Second one I call the learning communication level. This one is followed by the research communication level. And the last one, and maybe the more advanced, most advanced, is the constructive communication level. So it's very important to understand that as a tester, we will need to work on each one of these communication levels. And the importance is that to understand that each one of these levels has its own characteristics and the different kind of tools that we'll need to use in order to communicate successfully here. So let's review them very quickly. And again, you will have the slides, so I won't go into too much detail, but I do want to get that feeling and understanding about the different levels to each one of you. So let's start with the over-the-wall communication level. And I call it over-the-wall because it really looks like this. Basically says, hey, I found something, I know something, I'm gonna put it somewhere, throw it over the wall, and I'm not really gonna care about what's going on in there afterwards. So if we think about that, then we are going to be talking about bug reports, maybe even lists of bug reports that we're finding, testing results, update presentations and emails. And I might have said at the beginning that, yeah, this you cannot actually think that this is actually going to be something that you can do correctly if you just make a one-size-fits-all kind of package and throw it away. But it's still something that we need to do. Why do we need to do it? Because people are expecting us to do, and it's going to be a kind of a must-have, not enough kind of communication that people still expect to get from us, and they will actually get to it once in a while. So the objective of working with this list, trying to do this over-the-wall communication, is going to be for those stakeholders that need it to be able to make their tactical decisions. Now, what's a tactical decision? Okay, so I have time in my developers, which are the bugs that they need to be fixing. Okay, so you send a bug report and bug list, and they can actually go ahead and fix the bugs that you think are needed. Or, okay, what's the results of my load testing so that I know where do I need to focus and where do I need to actually start handling those bottlenecks. So all of that information is still going to be needed and updated. Okay, the characteristics, what characterizes this type of communication is it's kind of a fire and forget kind of communication. It is a one-size-fits-all. You don't waste a lot of time actually do it. It's very dry and fact-based. And the biggest problem is that you're not providing a lot of new information that really helps. You think about it, if you're actually reporting bugs and you're sending a list of bugs, chances are the developer already knows about those bugs because they got notification for your bug tracking system. Testing results, I'm pretty sure that if you find something, you will go to the developer and speak with him or her before you send that dry email. And the same goes for everyone else. So you're not actually giving anything new, but you're still passing information that you need to pass in order to make sure that everyone is working in an organized manner. Now, what happens if, let's say that there are 20 open critical defects in your application right now, and you send a list that has the name of those 20 critical defects open, it will enrage the people who are going to be seeing it because it says, yes, I know, are you trying to rub it in? No, I'm not, but it's something that I need to do. So people will still get mad because you're basically trying to say, hey, these are the things that are not good. You are one of the responsibles, and I'm just making sure that everyone knows about it. Okay? Now, you need to make sure that this is not your only communication activity. And this is where many times we are dead wrong. We say, hey, this is what I need to do. I need to be running test cases and reporting and not doing anything else. So if this is all the communications you're doing, no wonder people don't really appreciate the value that you could actually be providing. These are things that are very simple. So as much as possible, you need to automate it, okay? Why do you want to automate it? Not only because it's easy to do and it will save you time, but it will also become impersonal. The moment that the system is doing everything automatic, then you're not the guilty person who actually went over all the bugs and sent that personal email. It's the system that is doing dashboards and automatic reports, and it will take that part of the ego, that part of the, let's say, individual communication, it will take it out of the equation, and it will be easier for people just to, again, work with that, okay? Now, also try to use it a lot as basis for measurements. And again, I'm not going over the kind of worms that it's metrics, but I do believe that if you don't measure something, you don't improve it, and you need to measure stuff in order to make sure that your project is moving along correctly. So these are the kind of things that will be very useful as part of your metrics, okay? Now let's move forward and let's actually start talking about the more advanced levels of communication. So the second level that my model actually identified is what is called the learning communication. Learning communication, as the name actually says, it's when we're trying to learn more than we're trying to teach, per se. Remember, communication goes both sides. When I communicate, I both want to tell something out to the world, but I also want to learn something from the world. The learning communication level, it's a very important level. It's where you go into your requirement or design review meetings and you pay attention to what people are saying. When you sit on one-on-one meetings with your developers or your product teams, or when you sit with testing sessions with other people. What you want to achieve with that, the objective of this communication, is basically two types of objectives. The first of them is to get a better understanding of your application under test. You need to know what you're testing better. So the best way to do that is to communicate with people. Now, what happens once you start talking to the development team and even the product team or anywhere else that is very close to you, is that a byproduct of that communication is that those guys are going to start being aware of the testing process. Because if you're asking questions, then they will start understanding that your testing process is deeper, more complex, more scientific, maybe, or professional than simply pressing buttons. Okay, so it's a very cool byproduct. And you will see it when you start working with that. Now, it's a mainly inbound communication. In this place, you're not trying to teach or try to pass along so much information. It is around concrete and simple information about the product, about the risks. And again, as I said before, it will intrinsically introduce people into understanding how you're testing better. It's a great first step for information. But because you're doing it on an inward level and because you're doing it all the time with people who are very close to your work anyways, then it won't make these stakeholders be more involved in your testing process. It will help you to learn. It's still very important, but this is not what will help you to have a bigger influence or even become more professional in your communication. Try to focus on your internal needs and try very quickly to jump to the next level if you're actually trying to understand how can you add more value. The next level is what I like to call the research communication level. And the research communication level, it's different because you're actually starting to talk with other people in your organization. It's when you go to your support team, for example, and you start analyzing tickets. Hey, which are the areas that hurt the most to our real users? When you go to your pre-sales and your tech sales team and say, hey, and Bede was talking about that 50-step installation process. I remember going to one of my professional service team and says, hey, whenever we release a product, the upgrade just kills our users. Okay, and if you understand that and you start paying more attention to that and paying more attention to the bugs that are on that installation process, then you actually start providing more valuable information, but that's information that usually it's very hard to achieve. Now, other examples of this is once you're actually talking to support, to pre-sale, to tech sales teams, then you can actually start creating what's called personas. Personas are user profiles. Personas are basically, I'm gonna come and say, hey, this is how my user looks like, maybe given a name, characteristics, age, type of knowledge, maybe education, stuff that will help you when you're testing something or even reporting a bug, try to refer to someone more concrete. Now, stereotypical personas that you might want to think about is going to be, let's say, your non-technical father. My dad's a surgeon. He's a great surgeon, but he's very bad with technology. So he's an excellent persona for a non-tech guy who still has an education and it's relatively smart. Or think about the 8-year-old geek who knows how to work with your phone better than you do, but again, doesn't know a lot about languages or stuff like that. So you can actually create personas that will represent how your users actually work with. The objective of this third level of communication is actually to get more complex information into your AUT. Now, what happens is that you try to understand what other information can actually be given here. And the biggest characteristic that happens here is that once you start talking with people who are not your neighbors, quote unquote, meaning these are people who do not sit next to you and understand what you're doing, like your support or your pre-sales or your tech sales team, these guys will start asking tons of questions. Hey, do you test this? How come you don't have all these environments that we're always telling people that are very, very critical? So once people start asking questions, it will generate noise. Okay, it will generate noise outside of your R&D, outside of your IT firms, and that might actually make some people angry at you. So again, let's say that you're talking within an R&D organization, and all of a sudden the VP of support is actually coming to the VP R&D saying, how come you don't test good enough or you don't develop good enough, then that's going to be creating noise. And this is one of the byproducts. So whenever you start actually working this way, you will start working a more political arena. But again, it's part of the game. If you want to communicate better, you will need to start communicating in arenas that are more complex and will require from you to actually work better and in a more complex way with other people. Now, once you start working this way, and once there start to be a political cost to the communication that you're doing, you need to make sure that you're providing value to your immediate team. So if you're going out and, again, waking up those people in support, make sure that you come up with personas and actually areas where your testing or your development need to focus better, okay? People will criticize your deliverables, and people will say, hey, this is not important, that is not important, so be ready for that criticism. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. It's basically the first response of anyone who tries to modify the way that you have been working up to now. So if you're changing the way that people are working because of the new information that you're bringing along, the first reaction of everyone will be to say, hey, you're wrong, and what you're doing is not valuable. So if you believe that what you're doing is valuable, stick with it, okay? And it will be worth it after a while. I don't want to take too much of your time, and again, I'm going to be sharing the slides later on. So if we go over to the last level, to the fourth level, it's something that I call the constructive communication level, and this is by far the more complex one. This is where you actually are able to sit down with your development and your support and start doing pair testing sessions, okay? You bring them into what you're doing. Not only are you learning from them, you're actually doing stuff with them in order to teach them how you're actually working. And we're gonna be able to pass along first level information to them into how do you want to do stuff. You start doing test planning workshops with other teams. Maybe you even start doing what is called CABs, or customer advisory boards, and strategic customer sessions, or you go to your customers and you actually start working with them. Once you reach that level, that means that you have convinced your organization that the value that you're bringing is actually worth that risk. It's worth for you to go out and meet those strategic customers and actually learn from them as much as you can, and as much as you're willing to bring into the system. The objective of this communication, it's very much internal, is to try to bring information internally, but also to talk with stakeholders and make sure that they understand what you're doing, okay? You're gonna start meeting with higher VPs, with CXOs, and the first thing that will happen when you go to your CEO or your VP R&D or your CTO is gonna be that they won't really understand what you want from them. But once you're able to explain the value that you can bring, then they will start challenging you for that value, okay? It does require a lot of political skills, but it is very, very worth, okay? It does generate a lot of recognition, and it will turn you as a tester, or as a QA manager, I guess, if you're actually working on this level, it will turn you into what is sometimes called a trusted advisor. Okay, that means that, okay, you might not be reporting directly to that VP of R&D, but this guy knows that whenever there's a problem in the house, he wants you near him, because you will be able to provide very good information. And I know that it has happened to me in the past, where because of the information that I was able to provide, then even if I was not reporting to this person directly, I was called into all sorts of meetings where those decisions were being made, and it was very cool, but it was also very gratifying to understand that the information that I was able to communicate was so good that actually people want me over there in order to provide it, okay? Now, when you're working on that level of communication, then it becomes a 50% process, 50% content, which means that you need to put a lot of efforts into how what you're saying looks and how what you're saying hears, and making sure that you play that political arena where you get into a meeting where everyone actually knows what you're going to be talking about, because people won't be second guessing you as you actually provide that data. And again, it's going to be a different kind of game here, and you will need to be prepared for it. Now, many, many times the fruits of this level are long range. Okay, it's going to be something more strategic, but it's usually more worth it. Okay, so again, I just wanted to touch about these 4 communication channels so that you know that each one of them is a little bit different. And you will need to focus on all of them if you want to be a successful tester within your organization. Now, how does this translate to career path? And this was something that we actually saw after the fact when we started analyzing the data. The first thing that we saw is that the level of communication in testing actually is very much linked to the maturity in testing of that person. So it's usually the case that as you have been testing for more and more time, you can actually start communicating in a higher level. Okay, obviously there are exceptions. There are people who are excellent communicators from the moment they were born. There are people who will be testing 20 years and won't know more than report a bug. But you can see some, again, link between how much you've been testing and your communication level. What was more important is that we also try to reach to understand the value that the organizations were giving to these testers, to these testing firms. And we saw that the value that the tester was actually getting was directly related to the level of communication where he was actually working. It does make sense, but we need to keep this in mind. If everything that we're doing is just reporting bugs, then our value is going to be very, very low. If we're actually being able to provide more influence into our processes, then the perceived value of the testing team to the organization will be higher. And again, I'm making sure to call this perceived value, because there's tons of value in the bugs that we're reporting, but the perceived value becomes better when the strategic value of our communication actually is higher here. Okay, so I do want to make this clear. Now, I have been talking too much in theory, and I know that it's late, So I do want to give a couple of tools if you want to start communicating better. And the first one is called SMART, and the second one is called focused. Smart communication basically talks about how do you need to communicate. It's more about if you need to pass along a message, these are the things that you need to think about before you actually pass that message. How do you build that message or align it? Simple is basically graphs over words. Try to use as much graphs as you can. And if you need to use words, one-liners over paragraphs. Okay, try to distill your ideas into the minimal wage that you can do in order for people to understand it, because again, people won't actually read if you have too many words. Measurable, again, means that you need to try to work as much as you can on number and statistics over feelings and descriptions. It doesn't mean that trying to provide your analysis of the situation is not important, but you need to provide something that is not second guessable. Okay, if you provide numbers and statistics, then it will be very hard for someone to say, hey, the way that you're actually feeling or describing this is not correct. No, these are the dry numbers, and you should always start from that. Actionable means that you should not only pass along the information, but also try to suggest solutions. And this is especially important when you're working about bugs or maybe even issues, general issues on the system. Many times as testers, we believe that we do not have the authority or even the experience to try to say, hey, I found the bug in here, maybe you should do this and that to fix it. What we saw is that even if you're not 100% correct, if people perceive that you're not only bringing out the problems, but you're also trying to be a team player and say, hey, this is the way we should solve it, then those bugs and those issues are going to be received a lot better. Okay, so don't stop at pointing at the issues. Try to also think about solutions for that. Repeatable means actually a couple of things. First of all, when you're trying to show information and you have historical data, try to provide comparisons to what you're doing right now. So if you're saying, hey, we're not going to be able to release the product because we have 15 critical bugs open, try to say, hey, if we look into the last 10 versions, whenever we have more than 12 critical bugs open, we missed our deadline. Or this is the level of load that we're actually working on. If we look into the last 3 versions, then load should have been higher like this or like that. Okay, so try to provide that. And also repeatable will mean that if people come and say, hey, I need you to try to reproduce it better, you will be able to do it. And when you can, then actually try to provide another idea for that. And timely, it's also not trivial. Timely goes into your planning, and it means that if you're going to be providing a piece of information, you need to provide it at the correct time. And I always provide a mistake that I did about 15 years ago. And I remember that I came to the R&D meeting and said, hey guys, we have a problem. We have a very big memory leak in the system. And you can see it because after X and Y time of running this load test, and we saw the memory actually ramping up like this. And people got extremely mad at us as testing team. And the reason they got extremely mad at us was because we were 3 weeks from release. And we all knew that memory leaks would take about 2 months to release. So because we didn't actually get to those results before, and we didn't provide that information in a timely manner, we're automatically delaying the release for at least 6 weeks than when it would have needed to be released. So timely goes into your planning, but it's also an important thing to remember if you're actually trying to align your communication with what you need to do with the rest of the team. Now we're running low on time, so I just want to talk a little bit about the focus approach. And focus approach goes into something that Adis and Amela actually said yesterday if you were on their session, and that is that testing is a service. And testing as a service means that we have customers, our stakeholders, our developers, everyone else. And whenever we're actually providing a service, we need to provide it on a focus approach. And very quickly, focus means, first of all, fast. We need to provide answers as quickly as we can. Maybe not the best answers, but start by providing an answer and then maybe go deeper into it. Objective means that you need to be able to provide the good and the bad answers equally. Okay, so think about a doctor. Doctor needs to be able to provide good news and bad news in an equal manner, because if not, people will stop believing in what he says. Condense is to the point and quickly. Guys, there's something to say, start by saying it. If people want to get more ideas, they will ask for them later on. User-centered actually goes into everything that we've been talking about. If you're going to be communicating, align it to the person who will need to get your message and think about their need, not yours. If they are very busy, provide a very quick graph. If they want to get more comparison stuff, then actually do it, but always think about your user. And service means that your customer is always right. If people tell you that what you did is wrong and this was not the information they needed to get, don't try to convince them they do. Try to understand where did you go wrong. Okay? Again, we don't have quite a lot of time, so I will actually just summarize here. And again, guys, I'm going to go a little bit over questions and answers, but I think that I will do it over on Slack because I want to use these last 5 minutes in order to basically to recap our current OnlineTestConf, our spring OnlineTestConf that we are finalizing these next 5 minutes. So guys, just to take you over the last 2 days of sessions, and if you were not able to attend all the sessions, don't worry, there are recordings of each and every one of them, and we're actually sharing them. We already shared the first day, and we're going to be sharing the second day tomorrow. And I think that each one of the sessions, each one of them was a little bit different, but each one of them actually provided another part of the jigsaw that we're trying to put together. We were trying to talk about how you need to be a more technical person, and that doesn't necessarily mean to do more automation, and that is what Alan Page said yesterday, and I guess that Paul also talked quite a lot about that today. We try to bring you a lot of deep information from knowledge and experience, and that is what Felicity actually did yesterday, as well as Adisa Namela and Maya, she did today, trying to explain how each one of them were working on agile, digital, and maybe even crowd testing environments, and providing quite a lot of their knowledge and experience into actually providing you that information so that you can learn from them. We're trying to think about other technological stuff, and we think about the mobile information that you need to do that Eran Kinsberner provide for his the right mobile lab, or even what Bede was saying today about how do we need to approach our IoT testing. That was very, very important, as well as trying to provide additional tools. And I really enjoyed Matt Heuser's and Chris Ken's yesterday's talk about GitHub and how everyone can actually use it. So I really hope that each one of us got something out of this session. And again, I do want to thank, first of all of you for joining, for taking time for being here, for supporting us as much as we can. Again, to our very good supporters and people who are actually working with us, and also to the team, Maya and Christine, as well as Noah, who on the background actually made all this happen. So guys, I do want to thank all of you. It has been a very intensive 2 days, and I hope that we will be able to meet still later in the year for our next OnlineTestConf. So thank you very much. I will be on the Slack channel a little bit later on today trying to answer questions. But in the meantime, thank you very much. If you can give us feedback, we will really appreciate it. And from everyone on the OTC, we thank you for being part of these sessions, okay? Have a great day, have a great night, and I hope to be with all of you later on in the next events. Bye-bye, and thanks.